All right, let's talk spinnerbaits. You know, spinnerbaits have been catching bass for decades, and it is one of my most productive lures. You guys have been watching me for a while, know that I always have a spinnerbait rigged on the deck of my boat, and I'm ready to go year round. Matter of fact, I've caught fish over 9 pounds, many over 8, over 7, all on spinnerbaits. Thing is, they've kind of gone out of favor for other baits like chatterbaits and umbrella rigs and things like that. So I want to bring you back into the world of spinnerbaits because, man, they are so dang productive, and I've used them so many different ways. There's so many different ways to tweak them that you can use them in just about any different circumstance. So let's talk about, first of all, you can break them down to basically 3 different categories, and that's how many blades they have. There's the single spin, and that's usually has a Colorado blade on it, big thumper blade, and those are best used for night fishing, when you're fishing ledges, because when you throw them out there and you just let them fall on slack line, the body falls horizontally and the blade helicopters. And so it just kind of falls down straight down, and a lot of times, man, the bass just whack it, and it's great for wintertime fishing. Again, those steep drops, those ledges, those creeks, and then slow rolling it on the bottom. That blade has a lot of lift to it, and you can just slowly reel it along the bottom when the fish are kind of slow and lethargic during the winter time. Great bait to use during that time. The second category is the tandem spin, and that tandem blade has, you know, 2 blades, and that is the most popular kind, typically double Willow, double Indiana, but that works best for pretty much all the warmer months, because it has a lot of lift to it. You can fish it fast, you can fish it slow, you can fish it shallow, around different types of cover, different types of, laydowns, long docks, weed edges, over the tops of weeds. Perfect for summertime and springtime fishing, even in the fall. And then this third category is the one that's not talked about very often, but that's the multiple blade. It has 3 or more blades on it. You don't see that as often anymore, but I'm telling you, they really do produce well, particularly right after the spawn, because you've got a lot of fish right now that have spawned. There's a lot of fry and fingerling out there. So the first month or 2 after the spawn, multi-blade spinnerbait works really well. And then again in the fall, when the bass are chasing after bait fish, this resembles, a bunch of bait fish all grouped together, and bass are keen on that, so keep that in mind. Now, with that in mind, every one of these spinnerbaits, they can be really good right out of the box. Don't get me wrong, you can take them out of the box, make sure the hook is sharp, and go out of town and start catching fish. But there's a lot of tweaks you can do to make them even better and catch even more fish. So while we're talking about the blades, let's talk about that. You've got 3 main types of blades: Colorado, Indiana, and Willow leaf. The Colorado blades, as I mentioned, big thumper blades, working well in the wintertime, working well at night for that big vibration, but it also works in muddy conditions and in river conditions. When you've got the water's all muddied up, a lot of current, that thump, 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 thump. I mean, your rod tip just vibrates like that, and those bass can hone in on that, and you can catch a lot of fish on that when other baits don't in those conditions. So, Colorado blade. Another one is the willow leaf blade, and that's a slender profile. If you've ever seen a willow leaf in actual on a willow tree, that's what it looks like. And it puts off a lot of flash, not so much vibration. So it kind of gives off that profile of bait fish. It gives that little flag, bait fish, they go all over the place and they dart and they dive and they give that little flash, and that's what it gives off. So it looks like some bait fish, and typically those are tandem on a tandem spinnerbait, and you can fish them pretty fast through the water column. They don't have a lot of resistance to it, so you can fish them quick, you can fish them slow, and you can fish them through real weedy areas without the weeds wrapping up around the blades. So those work really well in those conditions. And then in between those 2 blades is the Indiana blade. That's kind of an elongated Colorado blade. So it's kind of a mix between a willow leaf and a Colorado blade. The Indiana blade puts off a lot of flash and a lot of vibration. To me, that is the all-purpose jack of all trades spinnerbait blade. I use that the most, tandem blade, and you can use that for burning across flats. You can helicopter to a certain extent, so dropping off right along weed edges, along docks, in and around flooded bushes, works really, really well for those type of things. Blade color is another thing to think about. You need to consider this. Most spinnerbaits you'll see they come in gold and silver, chrome type blades, and metallic type blades. Works really well under sunny conditions like today. The silver works best under bright blue and clear water conditions. Puts off a lot of flash, and bass could see it from further distances. When you've got a little bit of stain in the water, a little bit dirty, maybe a little bit on the muddy side, that's when you want that gold color. Or if you got bait fish predominantly that are like perch or other fish other than shad, that gold works really, really well for that. There's also another one that people don't talk about too much, which is a copper color. That's again a metallic color. Copper is like, when I first started fishing spinnerbaits, I caught a ton of bass with copper color blades, and those work really well when the water's muddy, it's dingy, maybe it's overcast and dark. That copper color really works well in those conditions, so keep that in mind. The other side of the spectrum is painted blades. Now again, you don't see a lot of those out there, but man, they come into play. They definitely do. The most common ones are the white and chartreuse ones. They work great when it's cloudy out, or you got a little dingy in the water, a little bit dingy, a little bit of stain in the water. That's when the painted blades come in. White works, I think, is the most productive one in my opinion. Unless I'm going after smallies, then that chartreuse color blade works really well. But there are anglers that swear by orange and red color blades as well, and I think those work best in the springtime when the bass are up shallow. I really don't have a lot of experience with those colors, but I do have them in my arsenal, and I will use them if I have to. So keep in mind those different blade colors, and that's the type of thing that you can adjust and change according to the conditions that you're fishing in. Another thing to consider is the trailer. And a lot of them, they don't come with a trailer. There's just a hook back there. A trailer meaning like a plastic something on the back. Now there's basically a couple different types you can use. The twin tail trailer is the most common. That's what comes with some spinnerbaits, or you can buy them separately, like the Zoom has a twin tail trailer. I use that the most. And it just has little legs and they just kick. And it gives it a little bit more action, a little more vibration, makes it look a little more alive. I think it's more appealing to the bass, and you get a lot more strikes that way. But you can add like some more action to it too, like putting on a ribbon tail worm or a grub. It gets a lot more swimming action to it, a little more bulk to it. And that gives the bass something more to hone in on, gives them something to, they can feel that vibration in the water, so it gives them an extra added sensory to, in addition to the blades, particularly if you're using willow leaf blades that don't have a lot of vibration. You put a 5-inch grub on the back of it, and that adds a little vibration to it back into the mix. It's a good combination. One other type that a lot of people don't use, but to add a paddle tail, it's like a 3-inch, 3.5-inch paddle tail swim bait as a trailer. And that puts a kick in action, tail in the back, makes it look alive, adds more bulk to it, makes it look like a bigger bait, works especially well in the fall. That, I would definitely be using that when you've got muddier conditions, darker conditions, when it's cloudier out. That's when I would throw something like that. Something else to consider is the skirt. Now, when spinnerbaits first came out and I started fishing them back in the 1970s, I'm dating myself, but they just had rubber skirts. That's it. It was just rubber skirts. And those work fine. They flow. They look good. Living rubber, it works really good. But they tend to, over time, kind of melt together and get gunky and just stick to everything. Then came the rubber strand skirts, and those work actually better. It kind of solved that problem, and they have a lot of movement and vibration, come in a variety of colors, and I don't think they're as popular these days. So it's something to think about. Give the bass something a little bit different. The most common skirt that comes with most spinnerbaits is the silicone skirt, and they have a whole variety of patterns and colors, plethora. I mean, a ton of them. I would stick to just your whites, white and chartreuse, and your shad colors. That would be like your basic ones. I've caught a lot of bass on crawdad color, like the brown colors. I haven't thrown any of the green pumpkin, but they have green pumpkin spinnerbaits. So if that gives you confidence, go ahead and throw that. And of course the red, that's always something to throw in the early spring and in the mid-spring. Have some red in that. One other skirt type though is my favorite, and that is the Lumiflex skirt. Lumiflex is hard to find. Lumiflex skirts. There's not a lot of people that make them, and I find that when I buy Lumiflex skirts, I go through them after a while, and I need to buy more, and whoever made them doesn't make them anymore. So I tend to bulk up. If I find someone who makes them, if they can sell them in a 50 pack or a 100 pack, I will do that. And that way I'm set for a good long time before I need to order more. So if you're looking for Lumiflex, first of all, Google it and you can find people that make it. Lumiflex has a lot more action to it. It just sways in the water. It's got more action to it and looks more alive. And the colors are vibrant. They pop. They really stand out. And I think that is what really makes the bass strike them. I mean, it is aggressive. There's a notable difference between a silicone skirt and a Lumiflex skirt in the way the bass strike them. When you got a Lumiflex skirt, you better have a good hold grip on your rod because they smack the tar out of it. They really do. It's a hard hit. What I do, here's my little tip. I buy white and also white and chartreuse Lumiflex skirts. That's it. Now, I just talked about a bunch of different other colors. Well, guess what? They got a little thing called worm dye. I buy worm dye, dip in worm dye, and I'll take a white skirt and I'll dip the tips in chartreuse. Now I got a little chartreuse, or then red, or I can put a little bit of red and chartreuse in them. There's a whole bunch of colors. There's June bug out there. There's green pumpkin, right? There's plum. There's a bunch of different colors out there. I made a spinnerbait. I call it the hippie spinnerbait because it looked like a tie-dye shirt. I put so many different colors on it, and man, the bass smacked the crap out of it. Right? So experiment, play with that. You can have a whole lot of fun designing your own different skirts with a bag of Lumiflex skirts and some worm dye. So something to think about. And you can dye your trailers too. I buy white trailers and I dye them. So that's, you know, I think it's more vibrant colors. They just look better underwater than the stuff you can buy off the shelf. So something to think about. Now, another way that you can control spinnerbaits or modify them, change them, is by the weight. Most people start off with 3/8 ounce spinnerbaits. That's kind of a standard staple used all over the country. They work fine. Nothing wrong with that. There's a reason why they're the most popular, because they catch a lot of fish. But don't be afraid to scale up or down. For example, right after the spawn, I'll scale down. I'll do 1/4 ounce. Because again, I mentioned they got the fry, there's the fingerling out there, the bait fish are smaller. There's a whole bunch of different species that have just spawned, and there's a whole bunch of fingerling out there. So smaller bait for a brief period after the spawn works really well for me. On the other hand, I tend to fish for the most part a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait. Yeah, a heavy one. I feel that's the most versatile. Does several things. First of all, it's easier for me to cast. I get more casting accuracy out of it. But more importantly, I can control the depth and the speed at which I can retrieve. You can bulge it right under the surface. What I mean by that is you're bringing it back so quick, the blades are just under the surface. It creates this bulge, but it doesn't break the surface. That's harder to do on a lighter spinnerbait because a lighter spinnerbait, when you're pulling it back that fast, will lean over to one side or the other. And it's just due to the torque, if you will, the resistance of the blades. It starts to twist that spinnerbait over. So a heavier spinnerbait, it won't do that. It'll still track true. And also you can flutter it down along ledges, along drop-offs, along outside weed lines, and get it down there and slow roll it on the bottom and keep it down there with that heavy weight. In all speeds and retrieves in between. It's just super versatile, so I use the 3/4 ounce the most. So get a couple different ones in your arsenal. A 3/4 also works really well in the wind. You don't have to worry about the wind catching it, and you know, you're casting here and you throw it and the wind throws it over here. A 3/4 ounce spinnerbait tends to go where you throw it. Speaking of throwing it, there's a couple different ways of casting that, again, you can improve your odds of catching fish. One of them is just the pitch cast, just like you're pitching a jig. Just pitch it into little pockets and holes and next to bushes and along docks, just like you would a jig. A lot of people don't do that. And you pitch it in there and you let it flutter a little bit. And the amount of times it takes you to reel the handle and tighten down the lines, flutter it a little bit. And a lot of times a bass has it by the time you tighten that line. They'll just smack it. Something's falling in the water, looks alive, boom, and they hit it. So that pitch can be a really good type of cast. The one I use the most is the sidearm and also the backhanded cast. And those are short, accurate casts. I'm not looking for distance here, we're looking for accuracy. And what we want to do is get an Olympic 10-point diver entry into the water, real soft entry. Even though I'm using a 3/4 ounce, it's all in the thumb, guys. Sidearm, you get it real low to the water, and right before it gets to the water, you thumb it, and just before it touches down, you let up on the thumb a little bit, and it just eases right in the water, barely without a ripple. That is deadly, because a lot of guys overhand cast, and the spinnerbait comes down and goes splash, and now it's like you're throwing rocks at a bass. It just scares them off. But that sidearm or backhanded cast with a real light entry, a lot of times you'll get nailed right within the first turn of the handle. So practice that. I've got a video here on how to do the backhanded cast. Go up, check it out. It's not that hard to learn, and it's going to up the odds, especially getting to areas where if you're fishing with a partner, you can get to targets where you can't with a backhand cast. So try that out. And the last one, I did mention bomb casting, and it does come into play, and that works when you're fishing big flats. Flats of grass, submerged grass, particularly a hydrilla, a milfoil. And you think about it like a clock, right? Like one side's 9 o'clock, the other side's 3 o'clock, and the front of you is noon, and you just cast a 1 and just, 3, 2, 1, noon, 11, 10, 9, right? Each cast, and just cover water and bomb cast it out there and bring it across the tops of these weeds. And a lot of times those bass that are up underneath those weeds will come out and blast it. That's how I caught my 8.5 pounder, a couple of 8.5 pounders, was fan casting large weed beds. That 9 one I caught was a bass was sitting next to a stump. And I cast past the stump and then bring it by the stump. That's another thing with spinnerbaits. Cast past your object and then bring it by it. Don't cast to the object, because the bass will be right there and you might spook them. So cast past it, bring it by them. Another thing is also when you retrieve. I mentioned bringing it back fast and slow, but one more is when you're bringing it back, say along a dock, bringing it back and then give it a pause for a second. Just reel, pause, and then resume your reeling. A lot of times the bass are following it and they're right behind it and suddenly it stops. They have two choices. They either bite it or swim away, and most of the time it's a reaction bite. They'll bite it. So try that out also when you're fishing it. So try all these different things with a spinnerbait. You're going to find they're a blast. You can get really creative with them, and you can catch a ton of fish while you're doing it. For more tips and tricks like this, visit bassresource.com.